Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland, and I am one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me is Stephen Tullifield, and we are going to discuss the Mandalorian episode, The Convert, which does have a weird double entendre, and it seems to be a theme. Stephen, how
Right.
you doing? How'd you like this episode?
I'm good. The episode was kind of refreshing that we got a chance to circle back to Dr. Pershing and the Imperial officer and see what they've been up to since the last time we saw them. It's been great. It was a great episode to kind of see another angle of the New Republic.
Very well acted.
Hmm.
I I did think the Coruscant material was a little uneven,
Yeah,
that it could have been trimmed some.
yeah,
I get wanting to show Pershing's seduction and what happened to him. I
yeah,
get that wanting to not be instant. So like I appreciate that, but it felt a little jarring after a very solid air-to-air combat scene. And
yeah.
and then the hard turn into going to Coruscant and seeing how former Imperials are treated.
Yeah, Yeah, it was a really big tonal shift, wasn't it? That was an outstanding fight with TIE fighters. It was so fun and their ships were so cool, of course. And then it just became a very different story. You're right. It just kind of focused more on character development.
Yeah, it was a hard turn. So like it was different, and different doesn't mean bad. It was just different.
Yeah,
And they had actors who know how to act. So like let's give credit where credit's due. That's like let's show off their talent, let's have them swing for the fences. Cool. And it does give us some issues to talk about with how POWs are basically being integrated back into society.
yeah.
So let's jump into the legal issues. So first off is the attack on Bo-Katan by the Imperial remnant. So there's already a lot of speculation that that squadron came from Grand Admiral Thrawn. I think that's highly likely because
Huh. Yeah.
that seems to be a lot of firepower,
Yeah.
and it's just a squadron of TIE interceptors and bombers. So they were very well funded, well armed. If Thrawn's back, it ties back to the Jedi episode where we had the magistrate and whatever they were building for Thrawn. It would make sense if he's building up a war machine.
Yeah.
Um, that
What's
does,
his Star Destroyer called the Chimera? Is that
yeah,
oh my gosh, that'd be so cool if we saw that in
yeah.
live action. It'd be
So
amazing.
what? So other podcasters have noted that there was no art on the TIE fighters, but in Rebels, only his flagship had the art on it.
Yeah,
So, and we haven't seen ties with nose art, so like
right.
that just hasn't happened. Uh, that said, it would make sense because of the level of the hit, and it seemed it's attempted murder. So it's one thing if the
Sure.
in Empire still existed and this is a nation state attacking the head of state. Like that's a legitimate use of military force. Pirates, I mean, like
Yeah.
effectively. So these are, like they're on the run still.
Hmm.
I mean, like they're like the military branches that refused to surrender after World War II. Uh,
Hmm.
and the Germans, they were the werewolves, where the guys stringing piano wire across trees to decapitate people driving. And
Oh gosh. Yeah.
yeah, Japan, there were guys up until the 70s hiding out in, forests in the Philippines, wasting their lives,
Yeah.
for 30 to 40 years of, I'm just going to hide here because I don't want to accept the war being over.
Mm.
This would be like an aircraft carrier refusing to surrender,
Yeah.
and all the support ships,
Yeah.
uh, which raise the issue: are you paying them? How are you feeding them? How are you supplying them?
Yeah, ideology only goes so far, I guess, but maybe it gets you that far. Who knows?
Yeah, do they have like what's their funding source? Like that doesn't, they're not a government. I mean, and we saw in Andor that Imperials did have warehouses full of money to make payroll.
Hmm.
So those crews are expecting payment or at a minimum food
Yeah,
and shelter. So that way they're cared for. Maybe they're willing to forgo payment, thinking that they're going to get it later after they've restored the empire.
right.
Uh,
You know,
but
it's been a million years since I read the original sort of Thrawn trilogy back in the 90s. I don't even remember if how back in those stories what support Thrawn had other than just sort of the power of his personality and the fact that he had the Star Destroyers. I don't remember that far back.
yeah, I never read them, so I'm at a disadvantage. But again, I don't know if they got into issues of supplies.
Yeah.
There's uh I didn't watch the TV series, but there was the book, The Last Ship,
Mm,
that dealt with just the destroyer Nathan James after a nuclear exchange.
mm. Oh, right. Yeah, I remember that show. I didn't read. Yeah.
Uh, but I read the book in high school,
Yeah.
and their issue is like resupplying. It burns diesel, so that meant they had to figure out places they could go. Excuse me, it was nuclear, so they had to figure out where they could go to refuel
Hmm.
and because their reactor was nearing the end of its fuel life, so they needed to go get more uranium to
Hmm.
fuel the ship, or plutonium, whatever,
Hmm.
something nuclear, and figuring out where could we go. So
Yeah.
like they had those issues of where can we go get food, how do we supply. Thrawn would have similar issues of where are they getting the coaxium to keep the Star Destroyer moving,
Right.
and are they just out there levying taxes?
Right.
So
Yeah.
so whatever Imperial warlord, it's they don't have a government backing them financially to take care of all of those things,
Right.
unless they're just going out and living off the land.
Do we have the sense that Bo-Katan is actually serving as any sort of she's not serving as a head of state anymore, right?
No,
I feel like this is sort of her like mopey exile uh kind of outpost. So it's sort of like a private home, I guess, maybe of her family or something.
yeah, and again, she is of the royal family, so it's arguable that she has the right to claim being head of state.
Mm-hmm.
So that would make her an understandable target. But this seems to be very much a vengeance maneuver.
Yeah.
And when you have remnants of a military deciding to go out and kill someone, that's attempted murder.
Yeah.
Uh, it's hard to figure out any way that's a justified use of military force under the law of war. And maybe that's something our friend Thomas could, cover in a blog post about whether that's makes her a legitimate target or not. Because you're not supposed to target civilians and just going, we have rules against assassinating heads of state, but we could still bomb a country and decapitate that capital. Like we did that in both times in Iraq with bombing Iraq, or when we hit Libya in 1986. We missed Gaddafi, but it was a use of force. So
Hmm. Homework for Thomas.
yes, yes, we'll send him his assignment for
Yeah.
tackling this issue. But let's pivot to Coruscant, and you identified some issues right out of the gate. Let's
Yeah.
walk us through entrapment.
Well, first off, I was interested in your take on because I feel like this sort of the end of the episode, sort of as an initial matter, it's not clear to me whether um, uh, Elia Kane is her name, right? The former Imperial officer. It's not clear to me whether she's doesn't seem like she's law enforcement. It doesn't, I'm not sure that maybe she's cooperating with the New Republic authorities, but I'm not sure that she's actually an agent of theirs. Because entrapment, of course, is a defense to criminal activity. And of course, they did all sorts of crimes there in Coruscant. They jumped out of a moving train and sort of trespassed all over a decommissioned Star Destroyer that was unsecured, but certainly didn't seem open to the public. Then he stole a bunch of material that was not his. And so the question is whether if Elia Kane was law enforcement, if she had sort of tricked him into engaging in all that criminal activity, regardless of his intent, regardless of his conduct, whether he would be liable for those crimes if she had somehow fraudulently or induced him into doing the crimes that he otherwise wouldn't commit. Of course, entrapment is not a defense to everything that you are sort of persuaded to do. Entrapment sort of assumes that everyday law-abiding citizens will resist the temptation to break the law if the opportunity presents itself. But where there are situations where law enforcement really kind of somehow coerces you or tricks you into doing something unlawful, that might be a defense. So I don't know, it seemed like he was pretty easily persuaded to engage in the conduct. I'm not sure how, assuming that Elia was a law enforcement, whether that would be sufficient for him to assert the defense of entrapment.
Good question. Is she just an informant who's using him?
Mm-hmm.
You know, she clearly is still loyal to the Empire and has an ulterior motive for her end game.
Right.
But it opened up the larger issue of that the New Republic is really not good at this.
Yeah.
Like super bad with knowing how to treat former Imperials.
Mm-hmm.
It's like after World War II, we did war crimes trials in Germany and few in Japan, not as many as we should have, but we did a few in Japan. And we eventually realized we would need to try all of Germany for being complicit in World War II and the final solution and all the evil that Germany did. And we declined to do that because we needed Germany to face off against the Soviet Union. And so we stopped with the war crimes trials. We got the big fish. This is different because it's what do you do with everybody else? It's like the U-boat commander,
Right.
And the crew on the U-boat who worked in the engine room. What do you do with those guys?
Right. And it's not like they're a separate political entity. Everyone's kind of, it's not like we're the allied countries are sort of trying to figure out how to resolve the crimes against humanity of another political entity. Here, the New Republic has absorbed sort of politically and culturally and socially the people who were imperial. So it's really just a transition of government. And it sort of raises questions about how we kind of resolve our differences with our neighbors in ways that I'm not sure that like the World War II war crimes trials would have sort of raised. It's so interesting.
Yeah, which then points back to the American Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
There was only one trial after the American Civil War.
Oh, really?
And that was for George Werr, who was the commandant of Andersonville. And because that POW camp where they kept Union soldiers was atrocious. The survivors came out, and if you look at photos of them and put them up against people at Dachau or Auschwitz, you couldn't tell them apart on who came from where. Walt Whitman served as a nurse during the Civil War, and he was on hand to see a ship come in with those survivors and he had no words to describe the condition of those human beings. Leading poet of the late 19th century had no words for what he saw. We had to reintegrate those who committed mass treason after the Civil War. And, the 14th Amendment, did preclude those who from holding office. The like Jefferson Davis spent time in prison. They captured him in drag, pretending to be a woman trying to escape. Yeah. So
Yeah.
You have, they tried sending back the former Confederate vice president who did the cornerstone speech to the US Senate, and a few other guys who had been generals in uniform, Confederate uniform, sent back to Congress, and Congress refused to seat them and said, no,
Right.
no. But we did Reconstruction, and we prohibited people from holding office, and we started rebuilding. We made sure African Americans had constitutional rights, and things were going well until the Redeemer movement started, and the rise of the Klan. But again, we did things to fight that. This is kind of comparable, but not.
Yeah.
There's some. We didn't have like reintegration dorms for people who were Confederates.
Yeah.
It's a weird beast, and like you're not giving people job satisfaction with what they're doing. Like if you want them doing prison labor, have them breaking rocks with a sledgehammer. Like there's a way to make sure that if you want to punish, you can. But what they were doing is just engaging in monotony that's going to encourage bad behavior.
Yeah. A resentment, at least, of the new republic. Yeah.
Well, that, and I mean, the robot psychiatrists doing check-ins, it's like you couldn't spare a human being
Yeah.
for that, to read the room. Notice that Pershing has a tick when he has a tell for when he's about to say something that either believes or disagrees with. He has a tell.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to play poker with him.
Or you could, but
you could.
Yeah.
He needs to know about that behavior if he wants to be successful at any sort of espionage or gambling. But it also shows an issue that the people of Coruscant just went through multiple regimes and didn't care. They go from republic to empire and their lives don't change.
Yeah.
So the super elite probably tolerated the empire because it didn't impact them because they were wealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, especially on the sort of the surface levels of Coruscant, where everything's sparkly and pretty and well manicured. The folks up there their lives didn't change very much at all, it seems.
No, they could still go to the theater, they could still do what they wanted, and the emperor was keeping them safe.
Yeah.
So they literally didn't care about what was happening, which means that they don't care about all of these POWs that they're reintegrating into society. That they're all getting a mulligan.
Yeah, although it was so interesting. I'm sort of been mulling that scene where Pershing is giving kind of his TED talk about why he's, how grateful he is that he's given this opportunity to try a new life and to, still put his talents to good use. And the sort of the coarseness of the way he was treated afterwards by all the people who just sort of fawned over him as some sort of example of they sort of acted really self-assured or self-gratified by how nice they were being to him when they could have been really cruel or put him in prison. And it's just sort of a very interesting commentary on how we regard people who are sort of the beneficiaries of some social improvements, or what's perceived as a social improvement, and how sort of cynical that can be. I thought it was really interesting. It's kind of, that scene is kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, because of they're living in a gilded age.
Yeah.
Is again late 19th century comparisons that, as long as the wealthy aren't having problems, like everyone else be damned. So they got that going for them.
Right.
But it's like, even with, again, post World War II, Operation Paperclip, we did not have von Braun doing data entry. Like, you're going to build rockets for us. You're taking us to the moon, and the next 24 years, big boy, get to work. Like, that was like, we found a place for the German scientists to be of service to the United States, and it wasn't pushing paper.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and I know we're sort of straying from the legal issues here, but it's like unpacking this dynamic is so interesting, because too, I think that I was just thinking, well, the technology in the Mandalorian was maybe really questionable morally, like all the, even Pershing sort of acknowledged that the ethics of cloning people is really murky, and on the one hand, you could kind of see why maybe the New Republic wasn't really interested in developing that, but at the same time, the ethics of developing nuclear warheads after was equally murky, and so the U.S. certainly didn't have a problem with that. But it's also, but it's interesting that he's acknowledged that maybe, at least cloning, but maybe some of the other things, that other technology or other weapons that the Empire was developing were so dark and maybe so unethical that that even he was kind of squeamish about it, and could see why maybe the New Republic was just kind of scrapping everything and wholesale and just not having anything to do with it.
I mean, I get them having a prohibition on cloning, which brings us back to the law, that he wants to do his life's work, and he's told no because they have the Concords or Armistice or whatever treaty of Coruscant that precludes them from engaging in cloning. And that makes sense on some level. I mean, and the stuff that he was doing is like dark, weird science of, I'll take this from a person and this DNA from another person and combine it together. It's like mad scientist territory. Like, this isn't, he lost his mom because if they'd just been able to grow a heart for her, like, she would have been fine. Or again, I've raised this issue before. It doesn't make sense that people who lose a limb need a droid part when you could grow them a new hand and attach it. That seems like it would be a useful thing to have.
The droid hand looks so much cooler.
Does it?
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta think of all the gears and everything that you have to maintain. It's
so metal.
It is. Well, like, I do not want a hook for a hand or a bionic hand. I'd like to stay me. But at least Pershing starts out in the right direction of like, hey, if we could just have cloned my mom a heart, she would have been fine. She would have survived. Noble intent. It then turns into, I'm now working for a war criminal because that's the only job I could get, like, drafted. I mean, so again, there's some squeamish issues there. But it does, for me, raise there's an equal protection issue with how you treat the former Imperials. So you don't want to create a system that's going to sow the seeds of the next war. Like, the best way to recruit for the rebellion was from the Empire. Former stormtroopers, people who were just fed up, tired of the tyranny. This is very much post Treaty of Versailles. We'll just disarm. Like, we'll put limits on how many ships you can have. We'll start decommissioning things. We won't have a standing army, so we can't defend ourselves from a threat. And that's all bad. It highlights the debate during the forming the country, where it was either right after we formed or was during the Constitutional Convention, where there were those who thought we could prevent war if we put a limit on the size of the army. And Washington made the comment, are you going to pass a law limiting the size of the invading army? Like, it doesn't work that way, dude. Like, that's not how real politics work. They want to attack you, they will, and you got to be ready for it. And so their disarmament is, they die because of that by the time of The Force Awakens.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so we were talking sort of about how Elia is sort of ambiguously, like, we don't really know her relationship with the New Republic officers that she was involved with. And if she's not law enforcement, if she's not sort of an agent, the alternative, I guess, is to think of her as just another person who has framed Dr. Pershing for the conduct, which then sort of, and of course, framing someone is just basically like essentially a obstruction of justice issue, because you're submitting false testimony or falsely identifying someone as having done the criminal conduct, mostly or largely when you're the one, in fact, who's done the criminal conduct. You're seeking to shift the investigative spotlight onto someone else. But as far as I can tell, she wasn't really interested in personally committing those crimes. She had some reason to get Dr. Pershing out of the picture, or to focus the New Republic on him so that he would be, whatever happened, put in the position with that mind flayer so that maybe she could erase his memory. So there's a lot of ambiguity kind of there at the end of the episode about her motivations, why she did what she did, where she's going with that, and which I guess I'm excited about, because I liked seeing them on screen and I really liked their characters. So hopefully we get to see more of them.
Yeah, and she now has a name as a, which was big. Now, I did see a TikToker theorize that she's pregnant because of the way she touches her belly twice.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Huh.
Yeah, sometimes it could just be straightening the jacket, but if somebody was that observant, power to them for figuring that detail out. But again, does she want to have Snoke? Like, what's going on here? Yeah. Because, at this time, this is about the time that Palpatine's clones out there running around and falling in love and having Rey. So
right, yeah, you're right. Yeah, or just before, maybe they're, I guess, how would that work in the timeline? Because it seems pretty clear. I mean, yeah, that Dr. Pershing was working for the Imperial Remnant, which turns into the First Order, which obviously is the society or the movement that produces all those clones of Snoke and Palpatine. So I'm not clear on what the ages of those clones would be, or if they were cloned sort of fully formed, or if they're cloned as sort of infants and have to grow up. It's unclear.
Yeah, because this would be, if it's 7 years or 7 to 9 years after Return of the Jedi. So we are, 25 years away from Force Awakens?
Right.
Yeah, math might be wrong, but that's just doing it.
Yeah, sounds right.
Yeah, so Rey's early 20s.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're right around that time where her father needs to be escaping and falling in love and having her.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess now come to think of it, the clones of Jango Fett were, their growth was accelerated. That was true, right? In the Clone Wars. So they probably, maybe it doesn't take a full
A couple years. Yeah, so it could be, but again, that's like developing a personality type and going like, hey, I don't want to turn into the emperor again. I'm gonna go find a nice lady and get married. Like that's a huge. You need a little time to make that decision, is all that I'm saying.
Right.
Uh, but again, maybe we shouldn't think too hard about the math.
Yeah.
Because we know there's other cloning experiments, and I got the impression from the Rise of Skywalker that the cloning on Exegol have been going on for an extended period of time.
Seemingly, yeah.
So, because again, building those Star Destroyers is not a weekend endeavor.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too how the Bad Batch is sort of parallel with the Mandalorian, and the Bad Batch just had an episode about cloning technology and recovering the Kaminoan technology and their techniques, and the Zillo bees, which is a huge callback. And so it's funny how they're the simultaneous runs of these two series are having these kind of echoes with each other.
And they're what, like 30 years apart.
Yeah.
So it's again playing the long game and figuring out cloning so Palpatine could have eternal life or whatever he wanted from that. So yeah, a lot to, again, they're connecting the dots to make Rise of Skywalker make sense. So there's a, but again, like it's not built in a day.
Yeah.
Kind of situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now let's get into going to the shipyard and being able to, again, we do get eye candy of taking the train ride, and when our protagonists are out having their ice cream, the background music you could hear is Star Wars music.
March of the Resistance. It's in universe canon. It's so cool.
I was like, that's well done. Bravo. Nicely done. So you get into the issue of trespass, both on the decommissioned Star Destroyer and the train without a ticket. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, first of all, the sort of hopping off the train and sort of milling around on the tracks after the train has taken off. That's it's kind of it's a public conveyance, so you have authorization to be in the train cars, but the tracks themselves and other areas that are maybe a little dangerous or are part of the functioning of the public conveyance are off limits to the public for sort of obvious reasons, safety reasons. And so that would be sort of a trespass, which is the sort of the entry of some place where you don't have authorization to be. And trespass, of course, is just a matter of common law, a matter of statutory law, but also things like trains are often regulated by local ordinance, or for example, here in San Francisco Bay Area, the Bay Area Rapid Transit is part of the municipal code for the city and county of San Francisco, and there's section 17.1 of the San Francisco BART District Code prohibits people from being on the tracks, unauthorized people being on the tracks. So there's sort of multiple layers of why that's bad, because they're not supposed to be there. But then also I was sort of hoping to check in with Thomas about like what the fact that these decommissioned Star Destroyers just are seemingly left unguarded, kind of maybe off the beaten trail, but certainly they didn't seem to have to overcome any sort of security or any guards. It seemed like it was kind of open to the public, but that seems like it would be very restricted IRL.
Yeah, that's like we haven't had a war where we had to decommission the other side's fleet for since World War II. And post World War II, we got German and Japanese submarines, and we learned from them because both had different advances and different tech than we did. And like the Germans had some late game ones that, if deployed earlier, could have made a difference. Glad they didn't. Japan experimented with hangar bays so they could have aircraft launched after surfacing. So yeah, they were but they were late in the war. Japan actually had planned to do a flea attack on San Diego in September of 45 as biological warfare. Yeah, to drop clay jars with parachutes with fleas to infect the population. We bombed them first. So, and they surrendered a month before that happened. It was planned to happen. We then used German and Japanese ships and some of our older ones at Bikini Atoll for the new, Able and Baker tests to see what would happen if you dropped a nuclear bomb on a fleet or atomic bomb on a fleet. And in one of those the mushroom cloud, you can see the Prince Eugen standing up on its stern, which was a German battleship. Yeah, so again, it's fascinating to go look at what happened. But again, like we literally nuked them to see what would happen. This is a junkyard for them to scrap, which theoretically should be employing thousands of people to take the things apart. And they seem to be doing it super slowly at a leisurely pace.
Yeah.
Like it's not important to them.
Yeah.
Did the New Republic have no teeth, no ability to, like, were the 1%ers just in charge no matter what government was there? It's a really weird and disturbingly weak style of government.
Yeah, very ineffectual and very sort of sloppy, it seems. But it's interesting because there's that contrast with there's a recent Bad Batch episode, and I should have looked it up, but they had to go to retrieve something from a decommissioned clone cruiser. Am I right? And that was sort of being patrolled by droids, and it was very difficult for them to get into it, and they had to slice things, and they had to engage in all sorts of peril to just get into the thing that they needed to get. And it's just stands in real stark contrast to, and I suppose that's the Empire that's kind of taking apart those ships versus the New Republic, so maybe that explains the distinction.
Yeah, it highlights what a bad peacetime leader Mon Moffat is, and just going, now we declared peace, we're done. It's like, oh, that's not how peace works. Like that's which is, again, the seeds for World War II were planted immediately after World War I. From, okay, you got the reparations issue with just hammering Germany and causing hyperinflation and all the bad things there. But you also have the Washington and London naval treaties saying like, oh, you can't have aircraft carriers, your battleships can only be so big, you can only have so many submarines. And the Nazis will ignore those eventually, as with the Japanese. It's like, come get us. Our Navy's now bigger. And surprise, we made aircraft carriers. We made submarines. You guys declared peace and you ignored us, and now we're going to kill you. And that's the lesson from World War I to World War II that's directly comparable to the New Republic not doing its job. And that leads to the First Order wiping them out. So do we get a New Republic?
Yeah, good question.
A restored Republic?
Yeah, what would they call themselves? The New Old Republic. we're back to the golden age of Jedi, but we're new.
We're just going to call it Republic.
Right.
Or maybe something different now. We've learned our lesson that Republic seems to not work for us anymore. Yeah. So yeah, it's just very, again, the political science student in me is like, yeah, this ain't right. Like you're doing government wrong because you don't know how to integrate people. You don't know how to prosecute a war criminal, and you don't know how to make sure that human beings are interacting with other human beings or any biological entity. Because the only time that we see other biological entities is for the lobotomy.
Yeah. This is troubling
Yeah.
on so many levels.
So let's talk about the legal standards for giving a lobotomy. Because
Yeah.
this used to be a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was highly perverted and cruel. But people who are involuntary committed have the right to refuse psychotherapy. And that's California Wellness and Institution Code section 4503. That's just one state example.
Mhm.
Now, this right can be overwritten on a showing of good cause, which includes treating physicians documenting the treatment needed, a review of the patient's treatment record by two treating physicians who both agree and recommend the treatment, and written consent by the patient or the person's guardian. And that's California Wellness Institution Code, section 5326.7. Not all of that happens. So they might be able to get to the two physicians to say, he went AWOL. Let's give him a lobotomy. Now, he's clearly not consenting to it.
Sure.
So you don't have that. He's not legally incompetent. So having a guardian appointed to make legal decisions for him is super problematic because he's competent. And
Right.
if their test is, well, he went AWOL, he's therefore incompetent, that's not how incompetency is judged.
Yeah, I was really unclear about what the purpose of, because they tried to spin it as being sort of therapeutic. Like they acknowledge that this technology can be used to really screw people up, but at sort of very low levels, it can help, I don't know, adjust or something, or help people come to terms with their living situation. I wasn't really clear on what they were trying to do with it. The Mon Calamari said, I've had the treatment myself. I found it very pleasant. So I'm not sure what they were hoping to achieve with it. But you're right. It's really antithetical to concepts of kind of rehabilitation and the other penological goals to just take someone's mind from them. It's very invasive. It's very scary, and something that we just don't do anymore. And it's very exceptional circumstances. So most states have very high bars about involuntary medical procedures, especially given the history of how states and governments have used those involuntary procedures to marginalize and institutionalize people with disabilities. Like in 1973, the Lanterman Act was passed in California that prohibits that sort of treatment by people with developmental disabilities. Previously, they were subjected to all sorts of categorizations of being quote unquote unfit and being sort of, when the eugenics movement was sort of, the politicians were sort of enthralled by that sort of very evil philosophy, that they would marginalize and vulnerable people were very cruelly subjected to involuntary medical procedures like that. So we've changed those legal frameworks to not do that, and except in very extraordinary circumstances and when there's some level of consent.
It's an abomination. Like there's no way around it.
Yeah.
To have someone be held involuntarily is a 5150 code. And that's for at least 3 days. The person has to be a danger to themselves. There's a few other checks and balances in there that highlight the person's a danger to themselves with law enforcement and a treating physician, and thus they're put on a 72-hour hold. This person's is not that.
Yeah.
So it's just, they go to psychosurgery very quickly.
Yeah, that escalated fast.
It's like, whoa, don't worry, it's gonna feel super peaceful. It's like, yeah, cutting out a chunk of someone's brain does that. So
Right. And he seemed to be, I mean, on the one hand, he seemed to be not distressed by the procedure at first when it was sort of the very low levels. And then, of course, Elliot Kane turned up the dial and took it into an where it was less therapeutic or less pleasant. But yeah, it seems like a very invasive procedure, regardless of the level of it. Yeah,
well, that and we skipped the entire concept of due process, right to counsel,
right.
a judge,
A
like
guardian, someone who's sort of an advocate for the person who
it,
is allegedly incompetent. Yeah.
it goes from the communications officer saying, hey, I was with him, leave me alone to turn up the dial.
Yeah. Sloppy, sloppy New Republic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like, oh, you have all of these other procedures automated by droids, which in theory should eliminate human error or wrongful doing. But for the thing that actually requires a setting, you have people do it.
In
And
unattended rooms. Like, it's hilarious.
it was just like, this is really bad. On one level, that's sloppy writing.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
on the
love Star Wars. That's so Star Warsy, you know?
oh yeah, oh, hands down. It's just showing that the malaise of the New Republic, and it shows why the Mandalorian is critical of the New Republic.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I've sort of been pointing, people have really been pointing out how from the get-go, that the showrunners have talked about how this show is going to bridge that gap between Return of the Jedi and the sequel trilogy by showing, like, you don't get the First Order without some very serious failings on the part of the New Republic. And I think they're coming at this show with sort of a very critical eye of the New Republic and its leadership.
Well, that because the New Republic's politics seem to be we're going to ignore problems until it kills us.
Yeah,
And I mean, that's isolationism in a nutshell.
right.
Well, okay, there are two flavors of isolationism. The flavor that could work is it that you maintain a very powerful military as a deterrent from anyone messing with you, because messing with you is certain death. Most countries that practice isolationism have not gone that road. They go the road of, we're just going to leave things alone because we assume we're the best. I have a Life magazine from 1940 that shows the US Pacific Fleet in action and how confident they were with the battleships out there doing all the maneuvers. Great pictures of the USS Arizona underway, and thinking that we got this. No one's ever going to mess with us. And what isn't focused on are aircraft carriers. And so, because they were tied to the idea of the noble battleship. And that's all that we need, despite the fact some of these things being old. And December 7th happens. And there's a lot of bad that goes into how we get there. And the Pacific Crusade category, explains that it starts in like the 1890s with US foreign policy. And that leads up to, what Japan turns into and embracing fascism, and us being, we're better than you. That all ends horribly. And it part of the reason is we're isolationists. We don't think that it's going to be a problem because no one's going to mess with us. The New Republic has the same problem.
Yeah.
And except they went in the other direction of just not having a military.
Yeah. I'm so interested in seeing how they'll handle this because I think, but part of Mon Mothma's political philosophy is what's so interesting about her is that um, her moral fiber is very clear, and she's very clear that she doesn't want to become the thing that they're fighting against. And so it causes her, I think, to have some very big blind spots in ways that I think, as we'll see, will cause a lot of problems down the road. But on the one hand, that's a very admirable thing to want to be take the high ground, to sort of be expansive and embrace diversity, and to have a lot of, to bring people in instead of shutting people out. But it's, I think it made them vulnerable to I don't know, we'll see what happens. I think it made them vulnerable to people who have other ideas.
Yeah, especially if they go like, hey, they're not going to arm themselves.
Right.
They go build our secret navy and get ready to blow them up. Let's go and start carving the equator out of this planet so we can turn it into a super weapon. Like, that wasn't done overnight. That had to take decades.
Yeah, sort of turning a blind eye to it, or not.
Yeah, again,
Action. Yeah.
Europe turned a blind eye to Hitler. Like,
Mhm.
it was France's responsibility to crush the German military if it started building up. They didn't do that. They built a wall. The Germans went around the wall. The French surrender and then start capitulating. And there are those who resist. So, like, you can't ignore the problem.
Yeah.
It's beyond ignoring your cholesterol. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm interested because it's, that dynamic between Mon Mothma and Leia that was so nicely portrayed in that Bloodline novel. That was really a great story. So I'm interested to see how they get there, about how they start to diverge and how they start to navigate that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so at this point, is Mon Mothma still the leader?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly, I don't know off the top of my head where. I sort of assume the Galactic Seven has been restored under the New Order, and so I don't know though. I'm trying to recall. I'm gonna portray my ignorance now of the new canon, but I'm trying to remember who becomes Is she the Chancellor of the New Republic?
Was it first senator?
Maybe something like that. I can't remember now. But anyway, I think she was kind of the first main leader of the New Republic. I don't know how long her tenure lasted though.
Yeah, and if they do term limits and
Yeah.
And rebuilding after the war would take time, but they're not doing a good job. So, like, there's again, it's like going from Woodrow Wilson to not McKinley,
Oh, you lost me there. Sorry.
before Coolidge dies in office. Why am I blanking on that president?
Well, Cleveland died in office, right? But no.
No, so hold on. Let's presidents who died in office in 1922. Oh, Harding, Warren G. Harding. Sorry, it took a minute for the brain cells to catch up.
Got it.
Again, one of the few guys from Congress elected president, and his campaign slogan was like "back to normalcy," and it was just, again, isolationist, do nothing, roaring 20s, and he either died of disease or his wife murdered him because he was having an affair, or Republican politicians murdered him because he was wising up. Like, there's a few competing theories. Him just dying is probably the most easy one to accept. So, because that happens to people. But yeah, Warren G. Harding. So it's kind of similar to Harding at this point, or like a James Buchanan before the Civil War. Like, you're just setting things up for failure by your willingness to not do anything. So anyway, any other legal issues from this? Or
Accidentally joining a cult. Like, it's sort of, oops, I'm in a cult. I had no idea. Yeah, I don't know if there's any legal issues with Bo-Katan doing that, but I thought it was really surprising.
Oh, that was awesome. Yeah. Whoops a days. My home got bombed. I have nowhere to go.
I woke up today. It was a normal day. By the end of the day, I'm in a cult. Who knew? Did not see that coming. But
I went to save a kid. I had to like swim to the bottom of this lake to save a dude,
Yep.
and now I'm in a cult after my home got blown up. So
And the great thing about never taking your helmet off is no one can see your look of shock as you realize, well,
oh no.
yeah. So we'll see how that turns out. I'm sure it'll end totally fine. I'm sure it'll be fine.
We fine.
Yeah.
Oh, good point. Yeah, that's yeah, I mean, I did wonder, like, oh, she went swimming too. She should technically be redeemed now. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
they acknowledge that. Good for her.
Yep.
Thus making her the unwilling convert, you know. I mean, she said this is the way meaningfully, you know, prior to the battle. Yeah, I'm very curious to where they go. Like, will they go find the IG memory board? Navarro could be a really good home for all of them. It's like, you guys don't have to live out here. You can all have a nice place to live. Or come back to what's left of my castle and we rebuild it. And like, this will be groovy.
Yeah, something about Mandalorians though makes me think they're not really looking for a nice place to live.
Yeah, but
They want to fight.
yeah, but I'm really surprised. Again, the Navarro would make sense. Like, you guys
Yeah.
could be law enforcement because they're pirates. You guys want to go punch a pirate? We could do that. Make sure the school stays safe. But I'm surprised Bo-Katan didn't have any ground to air defenses. You know, like they've been there a while. They didn't get nuked during the purge. Were there not any droids to turn them on if they existed? I mean, I have questions, but her body language was great with like, oh no. This day is not going the way I wanted it to.
Amazing.
So
Yeah.
much fun. Well, that everyone, Stephen and I are going to be at WonderCon on Sunday for civil rights in the time of Star Wars. So we're going to have a rip roaring good time. Join us if you're going to be there. And if not, we'll record the audio. It'll be fun. And Wednesday night, other members from our team are doing Wednesday and talking about all the great legal issues there. I've seen the slides, they rock. Be there. Saturday at 7, Sunday at 3 p.m. You can see us, room 207. It's gonna be wicked.
Yeah,
And so everyone, wherever you are, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky. Take care.